I am going to talk to you about a problem that I have spent 15 years dealing with in government. And I will tell you up front, it's going to be difficult for me to do this in 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, I will leave my email address at the end. I'm happy to have follow-ups about this. But the question that I want to talk to you about is, how do you integrate or federate security across organizations? What I'm going to cover in the next 15 minutes is give you a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to lay out what I have found through experience is the simplest way to think about that problem of integration, not only to frame it, but the different approaches that I have seen government and private sector organizations take to it. And then I'll talk about what I have seen as some of the big building blocks of capability, types of technology, types of activity that you can bring to bear to try to build that integration or federation. This is clearly a hot topic. I have been working with everything from international organizations to national governments to provincial or state governments and local government, all of whom are seized with the idea of how do we increase our security across the parts of our government, across the parts of our sector, if we are the private sector. We all recognize the old saying, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And clearly, there's a lot of emphasis being paid to digital transformation, to updating infrastructure, recognizing that there is no such thing now as a purely physical infrastructure, that everything is digital. And this is a threat environment that has made the problem even more dire. The nation-state activity we have seen emanating out of Russia over Ukraine, we're dealing with a nation-state, Russia, that has a doctrine, that has capability deployed in Western critical infrastructures. And of course, we've got increasingly capable criminal activity. So if you look at this situation, organizations are saying we need to collectivize, we need to make our security inter-organizational. And how do you do that? I have seen a dozen ways to do this. I have seen more than a dozen ways to fail at doing this. I've led some of those failures, be honest. And the classic variables of people, process, and technology are the things we want to work with. I did this at the federal level in the United States. I ran the national whole-of-government cyber initiative for President Bush and for President Obama. That included an activity to connect the major federal cyber centers, the security operations centers, the centers of excellence in the U.S. government. How well did we do it? Well, after 5 years of trying, President Obama directed me to build another cyber center about threat integration. We clearly had not gotten it right. Now that I've retired from government and I'm in the private sector, I am the chief information officer who deals with the public sector, government around the world. So I've got a good appreciation for what the art of the possible is from the private sector perspective. Now, how do I frame this problem? Well, we know why cybersecurity is hard to do within a single organization, within an enterprise. There are thousands of books, thousands of webinars that tell you about the problems of doing that kind of security. It is compounded when you try to do this across organizations because you have all of the challenges of doing it inside each organization, and you're trying to level set, create a common playing field for players of, in many cases, dramatically uneven capability and resources. But the same trends, the same building blocks that we have to do enterprise-level cybersecurity can be brought to bear on this. Now, the simplest way I have found to think about this problem of integrating security is to break it into two parts. To put it in plain words, what the heck is going on and what do I want to do about it? To put it in slightly more elevated terms, you're trying to build shared situational awareness, to have a common operating picture of threat activity in the organizations that you're protecting, and then you want to drive integrated activity to respond to that. Those two functions, building shared situational awareness and driving integrated response are related to each other, but you can work on the two independently. And actually, a surprising number of organizations prioritize response without working on having a common operating picture. What is shared situational awareness? Shared situational awareness is a human problem. It's a people problem. Cybersecurity, as a tactical, technical issue, is done by machines. Machines don't need a heat map. They don't need a dashboard of problems. They work on digital commands. It's people who need to have an understanding of what's going on. It's a matter of saying, I gather the data, I make sense of the data, and then I'm able to make short-term, near-term predictions. We all talk about not only cyber threat intelligence, but actionable cyber threat intelligence. That means something that has near-term predictive value. That's normally where organizations that try to do this fail. Now, this is a cognitive problem. It's a thought problem. It's how people work with information. And this is why it's hard to do even within a single SOC, because it's hard to teach experience. A senior seasoned analyst can look at data and go, if I see A, B, and C, I know the next element is probably D. A junior person doesn't know how to do that. So we try to teach shortcuts. We use standard operating procedures. We use common templates. For large organizations like government, they may even send people off for formal training to try to get them to think alike, in a good sense, to do analysis in a common approach. And they're working with a common mission, they're working with common data. Now, when I'm trying to integrate security across different organizations, across different SOCs, you can see that we no longer have those common tools, those common understandings. We may be looking at different data. If I'm trying to talk about threat data and operational data for a sewage plant and a nuclear power plant, they're different things. They work on different time scales. So this is a problem, but under the best of circumstances, my experience has been that if you are in an organization that is trying to build shared situational awareness, your Security Operations Center will spend 55 minutes or more out of every hour figuring out what is going on. That doesn't leave much time to do something about that understanding. So by definition, you want to be highly efficient at doing it. So how do you build situational awareness? Well, in my experience, there have been two ways to do it. And this doesn't matter whether you're building a super SOC that sits atop all of the other organizations, or you have distributed it so everyone sees the same thing. You have the Hollywood vision, and then you have the real life vision. I mean, we're all familiar with the Hollywood vision of a hacker does something and the opposition sees it bouncing across the network, going through all these intermediary sites and getting to its target. Or if we're talking about the movies of North America being attacked by bombers or missiles, you see them moving across the map under Cheyenne Mountain. This has the advantage of everyone who looks at it knows what it means. It means the same thing to everyone. So this is a good way to build common understanding, to have that simple shared situational awareness. What's the problem with that? It's not an off-the-shelf product. It's something that is bespoke, has to be developed from scratch. And in reality, I have only seen this work in circumstances where someone actually can tell all of the organizations that you're integrating or federating how to do it, or can provide a common set of tools to them. And that's why it's cases like a military that is usually able to succeed at doing this. For the rest of us, we come down to federating by sharing data. Everybody gets a copy of what everybody else is seeing. You end up with what I call the wall of terminals. Everybody has a copy of what the other SOCs are seeing. The advantage of this is it's easy to do. All I need to do is buy a few more displays. The challenge is I'm taking what was already a hard job for the Security Operations Center analyst and making it even harder. They now have to integrate multiple things. And in practice, we have seen that if I have 5 or 6 different views that I'm trying to integrate, people can do an okay job of doing that. But when I get to 2 or 4 times that many, it starts to break down. So this is the solution that people often go with. Share the data, have a whole wall full of displays, but it becomes difficult to make that work. The other issue to keep in mind is, who is this situational awareness for? Is this for your senior executives? Is this for the policymakers, the decision makers, or is this for the people who are actually doing something with the data, defending the network? And I think you're all probably familiar with the MITRE attack framework, correct? The 14 tactics that they use to organize techniques, and then thousands of particular practices of malicious activity. My experience has been something like the MITRE attack framework, which SOC analysts, threat analysts doesn't work for senior executives. It's too complicated. It doesn't relate to their world. So if I'm trying to inform senior management and I come and tell them, ma'am, we have seen credential acquisition, which is one of the parts of the MITRE attack framework, it doesn't work. So one of the key decisions to make if you're trying to design this shared vision is, who is this vision for? So that's shared situational awareness. Regardless of whether you want to do that or not, you definitely want to do something in terms of execution. And again, in my experience, working on this problem for 15 years, I've seen 3 different approaches taken to do this. The one is you build the tools yourself. You literally start with the data, probably in common formats like StixTaxi or shared log files, and you literally say, I'm going to customize my solutions to my particular problem. The advantage is that gives you a solution that is the most efficient for what you're trying to do. The challenge is you've taken on all the work yourself. Even if you've hired people to code the execution, you are now wholly responsible for designing the solutions. And that's why, in practice, I have found that relatively few organizations go with option 1 on this chart. Most go with option 2, which is to say, can I find commercial products that align with these 2 capabilities and build off of those? You could make the argument that a SIM tool, security information and event management, is the essence of tactical situational awareness. Similarly, you can make the argument that a SOAR tool, security orchestration and response, is a distillation of what you're trying to do on driving response. The beauty of this, if you go with commercial products, is they are typically designed to deal with inputs coming from multiple kinds of devices and sensors, from multiple kinds of types of vendors, and similarly to output that way. So you have offloaded much of the work of building the interoperability and the translation to a vendor. Number 3 takes this to the next level. You may have heard Gartner Research last year talk about the emergence of what they called cybersecurity mesh architectures. The idea that there is increasingly convergence in cybersecurity around a migration away from a lot of point products to a handful of families of interoperable capability. That takes the idea manifested in SIM and SOAR to the next level of saying even more of these functions can be integrated, and the integration work can be done by deep pocket vendors, not my organization that I'm trying to integrate. And I would stress that these 3 approaches are not mutually exclusive. I have found that many organizations will start with number 2. They will try to use SIM and SOAR as their first line of effort. If they have gaps, functional gaps, they may design something from scratch to fill that gap. And as they look to where their organizations that are being federated and integrated are going, they may try to factor the existence of these mesh architectures into the future. So I'm having this conversation around the world and at all sorts of levels of government. And these are the questions that I'm posing to the organizations who say, Jim, I want your help in thinking about this problem, or I've embarked on one. Can you tell me how this maps to what other people are doing? The first thing is figure out your relative prioritization between building that shared situational awareness and execution. Because while we may think, clearly, I need to know what's happening before I do something about it, As I've described the problem of building shared situational awareness, you can see that it's very difficult. It's mission impossible if you're looking for perfection. And a surprising number of organizations are really starting from the other end. They're starting from saying, can we have shared managed security services? Because remember, I said often you're federating across organizations of unequal capability. In some cases, these organizations have close to zero cyber capability. So the governments that have started from that back end have said, if I can take data and validate that it's a real problem in these organizations and give them a solution, I can't tell you I'm dealing with the worst problem or even one of the worst 5 problems, but I can tell the politicians, I can tell the citizens, I am dealing with the real problem. We are better off than we were before we federated. It's crawl, walk, run. And they're being realistic and starting at that stage. The rest of these are questions. The one that I underscored there is, from my mind, the most important question, and that is anyone in charge of this integration effort? By which I don't mean does anyone have the title, I mean do they have directive authority? Can they either force the organizations to do things a certain way? Can they give them resources or even tools to do it? If the answer is no, then you may have the title of being the director, but you are really the cat herder in chief. You are playing a game of cards where you have to deal with the cards that you've been dealt. So the biggest question to ask is, what is my ability to actually drive change? I want to shift very quickly, because I'm running out of time, to talking about these building blocks. Now, I used to manage threat intelligence for the US government. 100,000 people, 17 agencies. I had the cyber portion of that portfolio. This is near and dear to my heart. We talk about cyber threat intelligence. That is key to both understanding what's happening and driving solutioning. Threat intelligence exists in 3 different fashions. You have tactical. You have the information machines generate, the indicators of compromise, the forensic-based things. One machine generates it, another machine consumes it. If you will, it is taking raw data and turning it into dots. Humans, either on their own or with the assistance of machines, machine learning, can connect those dots into patterns. They can put together patterns of tactics, techniques, and procedures that adversaries are using. They can make playbooks out of those. That is operational intelligence. Humans consume it, humans produce most of it. And once in a while, you get a eureka moment that is, I see something that is so important, shields up. It is time to change my posture. Strategic intelligence. Situational awareness is about that operational information. Think back to those pictures of the threat map. It is not about indicators of compromise. It's about vectors. It's about things that a human has abstracted. So this is lower volume information that a human has had to make and a human has had to use. And as I've said, if you're going to do that kind of situational awareness, it's going to take most of your time up. Execution is about tactical information. It's about that machine-generated, machine-usable information. So the advantage is, if I don't have much time, fortunately, that's the kind of information that already readily scales to machine execution. AI and ML is the biggest change in the 15 years that I've been working on this problem. And yes, we've gotten increasingly good at doing this at an enterprise level, at a very large scale, but the reality is, as the algorithms have become more powerful, they have also become more portable. You can now come up with versions of the heavyweight data center scale AI and ML that can be forward deployed in an organization's SOC, that can be forward deployed at the network edge to be a force multiplier. AI and ML, and it's become a meme when we talk about that as the solution to everything. But in fact, it is an extraordinarily powerful lever of change in this direction. I've talked about SIM and SOAR. If you haven't looked at the latest generation of SIM and SOAR products, I would look at them from the perspective of how can they help with this federation and integration. AI and ML is increasingly embedded in SIM tools. Matter of fact, some SIM vendors are now calling their product security incident management tools, no longer security information inventory and assessment tools. They use AI and ML to actively inventory the assets they're connected to. They normalize the data. They level set across different kinds of data. They very much become launch platforms for moving forward on this. And similarly, SOAR tools are no longer just about saying, I'm gluing together different products for common functions. Increasingly, they can be used for organizational integration. You can have, in the case of Fortinet, a virtual war room that when you see a certain type of activity, you can spin up a response that includes what the C-suite will do, who will contact law enforcement, who will go to the press. I mean, literally, these can become ways of orchestrating broad response, not just a matter of what do my security machines do for response. And I talked about Gartner's idea that we're moving from this idea of best of breed solutions all reporting into the SOC. Gartner's example has 20. I have seen 100 in practice in one very large global organization. Too many things for a SOC analyst to manage either by hand or with the aid of a SIM product. Well, because of vendor consolidation, we're increasingly getting to the point where you have families of this interoperability, where it's tools that can now work with each other. So it's more than just SIM or SOAR. It can be SIM, SOAR, network access control, and other things all working together. And I'm going to close with one that says, these are not one vendor solutions. Fortinet is actually the hub of one of those mesh architectures, and we have over 500 integrations with other vendors, ranging from the public clouds and software as a service down through exchanging threat data with our competitors. So the mesh architecture approach, in Gartner's estimation, is going to be adopted by 80% of enterprises over the next few years. So this clearly is something to think about. So what I've tried to do, and I'm giving you in 15 plus minutes what I've spent 15 years working on. So it is, I know, scratching the surface, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to follow up with them. I've tried to describe the problem. I've tried to break it down into bite-sized chunks and tell you what the approaches I've seen other organizations take, and I've tried to describe some of the building blocks. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you staying with us on a late afternoon. Thank you.